three different sets of data that we want to collect on both the national level and the city level to measure state tolerance. So already what we've done is, for the laws, we have two different sets of data. One is we looked at all the studies that have been done that look at state attitude towards migrants and analyzed those and looked at how what data they did or didn't use and how they conceptualized it and what they thought about it. And then we also created a database of all the laws that regulate migrants on the national level in 3 cities. And we started looking at those laws to try to see what's going on. So let me deal with the first set of data. There are at least 8 major studies that look at state tolerance in China. And sorry, the Chinese names are there in Wingdings. But if anyone who is interested in the Chinese names afterwards, they can come up and let me know or email me, and I can get the citations to them. One of the things I want you to notice is that the studies are fairly recent, so this is sort of a recent topic, it's a hot topic right now. The second thing I want you to notice, most of them are on the national level. There is one new study on the city level, which is sort of exciting, but it's on Beijing, and so it's always the big 3 cities: Beijing, Shanghai, Guangdong, which are studied the most in, or Guangzhou, sorry, that are studied in China. The second thing I can say about these studies as a group is that there is some agreement and some disagreement about state tolerance towards migrants in China. All of them suggest that there are different periods of state tolerance, of more or less state tolerance. And some have 4 periods and some have up to 6 periods. And none of them have data behind their suggestions. Like, none of them point to systematic analysis of laws or newspapers or any kind of data which helps them measure state tolerance. So this gives some meat behind some of those claims. And Wei Han and I came up with 6 different periods on the national level in terms of state tolerance. And this is a summary. And basically, I'll briefly go over them, and then I want to give you a little bit more detail for each period. So the first period is the pre-78 period, and there's very little disputes on this. Everyone agrees before 1978, 78 was the opening of China. Pre-1978, they were not tolerant of migrants at all. It was very forbidden. And then the next period, or 2 periods, some scholars squash those into 1 period and say that it was a loosening of the laws and increased tolerance. Some say it was not, put them in 1 category, but say that it was continued control over and not very much tolerance. We break it into 2 categories. And then the third period is a reversal, a crackdown. And then it starts opening up, and it continues to open up through the 4th, 5th, and 6th period. So really, the tolerance increases, crackdown, and then increase. So one of the questions just from this preliminary periodization is that crackdown an anomaly, or is it punctuated over time? Well, we see this again throughout as China deals with the migrants. On the left-hand side of the screen is just to show you how many migrants are in China. And in 1989, there were 30 million migrants. By 2003, there were 140 million migrants, over 10% of the population, estimated to be over 200 million by 2009. So you can see, as state tolerance increases, the numbers have definitely increased. Whether or not there's a relationship there is another question. So let me just give you a little bit more detail about each period. As I said, number 1, the first period, pre-79, little debate that there was no state tolerance towards migration, and that was things were governed by what's known as the hukou laws, which was like an internal passport system. The second period, according to our analysis, is what we call cautiously controlled. I would still describe this as no tolerance, very little tolerance. Really, there was a change where farmers were allowed to farm their own land. They don't own it, but they were allowed to farm it individually, and they became more efficient, and that created a surplus of labor. And so that surplus of labor was allowed to go to nearby towns and villages to do business, to sell their vegetables or whatnot. So there was a little bit of mobility, but free-flowing mobility was still not tolerated during this period in China. And then the third period was when where the tolerance for migration started to increase a bit. But the government and the laws only encouraged people to migrate to nearby cities and towns. This government still was not tolerating people to migrate to big cities yet. They only were really pushing people towards the smaller villages and towns during this period. And this period ends in 1989, and I would argue because of Tiananmen Square, led to a significant crackdown on migration and mobility. Interestingly enough, all those 8 studies that were done, not one of them mentioned Tiananmen Square, which shows you the power of politics on scholarship in China, still to this day, the way in which it shapes scholarship. After '89, as I said, it led to serious crackdown, and people again were only allowed to go to the small cities. Asian Games China wanted to put forth a good image, so they continued to crack down. Eventually, by 1992, this period of crackdown ends, and China becomes more tolerant of migration. And it's, I would argue, the first period of China really tolerating free-flowing migration. It starts in 1992, which is marked by Deng Xiaoping's Southern Tour, which is a very famous event where Deng Xiaoping is in the south, and he's in these enterprise zones where he wants there to be massive production, manufacturing for export, where everything we own is now produced. And he said, come to these export zones and work. And so the migrants did, and that really led to state tolerance. I think this is the first real period of state tolerance. And this period continues, and then in 2000, from 2000 on, not only is the national level tolerant of migrants moving into the cities, but it actually suggests that these migrants have rights, and they might actually should be protected. And so there's more language about the protecting the migrants and making sure they get paid, making sure they're paid at least the minimum wage, making sure their kids have access to education. So there's more concern for some basic rights for these migrants in the cities, which is a lot of the scholars say is much more supportive towards the migrants, not just tolerating, but also supportive towards the migrants. So that, on the national level, that's what's going on. So what's happening on the local level, right? So on the national level, you have those 6 stages. Well, national level, there are over 50 different laws that govern migrants. It's far less on the local level, and there's differences. Beijing has 21 laws, but Wuhan only has around 15 laws. So there's differences in the number of laws. What that means, I'm not sure yet, but there are those differences. Beijing, I was wrong. I thought Beijing would look like the national level. It doesn't. They have no period of letting up on the migrants. They restrict what kinds of work people can do. They restrict where you can live. They require 15 different permits, each one costing money. They're quite, there's very little tolerance for migrants in Beijing. Nanjing is the exact opposite. Nanjing is almost more supportive of the migrants than the national level in terms of protecting their rights. And then Wuhan is the one where you really see a shift, where it's restrictive at first and then it becomes more supportive. And this could have something to do with the fact that it's a sending-receiving city, where at first they were protecting jobs and now they need workers and they're being more protective of the workers coming in. But it's going to take more data and more analysis to see. But there's some interesting things going on here, because one, there's variation across the cities, and 2, there's variation between the national level and the cities. So this needs to be looked at and explained.